So I think travel has always been in my blood. As a family, we lived around the world. So Montreal, Canada was home base, but lived in Tehran, lived in Malaysia, lived in Poland, and sort of each of these different sort of international experiences, I think, influenced just sort of the way I now sort of experience the world and different perspectives and cultures, and kind of the blending of all of these unique experiences has led me to be in the business of sort of memory making and experience making. And starting in Montreal, I kind of realized that being in the built space is sort of an exciting place to be. And I started working for a contractor for a summer, and then in undergrad worked for 4 seasons as like a student consultant. And I think what I quickly realized about the hotel world was it's going to be a place where it's going to be impossible to get bored. You have all of the challenges of sort of the physical built world. You have all the excitement and improvisation of service and hospitality. And then you have to layer on all of this extra sort of design and storytelling and branding on top of, both of those sort of facets of the business. And so I think I got hooked right out of the gates, and it's been an industry that's been keeping me sort of motivated sort of 20 years later. And I've been fortunate, I'm aware that I've been fortunate to find a calling that early in my career, and I've been just kind of focused on perfecting it ever since.
I would love to get into some of the things that you observed, because you ended up working for Gemini, did retail and hospitality projects, and then you worked for Sidel, the renowned hotel developer that we're recording this at the Freehand in Los Angeles. You're involved in this early. So many amazing properties across the country. I'm curious some of the observations that you had about hotel development, from those experiences, not specifically about the companies you're working on, but the general kind of industry, both good and bad. What was intriguing about it, and then what were maybe some aspects that turned you off a little bit to this world?
Yeah, so my first job was of interest, ski resort developer. That was a public company, and then worked with Gemini and Sidel in New York City before starting Dovetail. The challenges in the development space, well, I guess there's many, but some of the challenges that I saw and that I was hoping to fix with Dovetail, or at least sort of improve upon, was real estate is a long-term business, and the idea is you're creating physical spaces for the long term. And that can sometimes be challenged if your partners or capital are more shorter term in nature, or if you work for a public company and you're judged on your quarterly results. It's sort of like, it just feels like a mismatch. Or even if you're just trying to get in and get out in 3 years. Sometimes it's really hard to do that in this space. So, my view is, let's buy great real estate, let's create something special, but let's focus on the long term, and let's kind of keep getting better day in, day out, and kind of create value for our guests, for our team members, and for our stakeholders over the long term. And so that's something I'm trying to do with Dovetail.
I'd love to speak a little bit more about that long-term mentality, but on a personal level. So you had these entrepreneurial interests from a very young age, but you ended up working for quite some time for different development companies. Why do that versus launch something of your own right out of the gates?
Well, I think the truth is you want to surround yourself by as many great people as possible along the way. And so I was fortunate to have some great mentors along the way, and I think that gives you a chance to sort of see how things are done from a variety of perspectives, and you get to experiment and take risks and make mistakes, and you kind of, the idea is hopefully over that period of time you get enough knowledge that you'll make more right decisions than wrong ones when you do kind of go out on your own. The truth is, I was in Australia always daydreaming about starting my own business, even from the very first job as like a 22-year-old, and I didn't know any better that I needed more time. But if you're gonna, you really do need to, especially in real estate where there's so much capital required to be an entrepreneur, and if you don't have a personal sort of balance sheet that you can put to work, you need to build a body of work and a track record to show and to create credibility, for your investors and your stakeholders. And I think, for me, that was important to kind of go through that period of my career to be able to then create credibility and bring in investors and sort of focus on projects on our own account.
And now you're running Dovetail.
Here we go.
I'm very interested in kind of this notion of playing long-term games with long-term people. And so thinking beyond just, it sounds like you always had this long-term vision that you're working backwards from. You're getting to know people in the space. I think, to me, one of the things that seems to be the case in the world of, especially lifestyle hotel development, is a lot of big egos.
Yeah.
And I feel like potentially that may manifest in interesting concepts and experiences, but there's a lot of downsides to operating with a big ego. I guess from what you've observed, is it possible to be low ego but still have a very differentiated point of view and create interesting hospitality concepts?
Absolutely, and I think it's more sustainable and more enduring in the long run. I think you do need sort of exceptionally like creative and colorful personalities within the hospitality space to sort of push the story, push the envelope, take risks, like move beyond the sort of the most expected of design choices, experience choices, partnership choices. But I don't know if that lasts. Maybe that's sort of a flash in the pan, and what lasts is the feeling you get interacting with someone at the front desk, or the way a space feels, and as it grows and as it sort of patinas and as it sort of evolves. And I think if you want to build a company for 50 years, I don't think it can happen just on the back of like one name or one idea. I think it needs to be a philosophy, it needs to be an idea, it needs to be embraced by the team, and you need to sort of grow with that type of like servient leadership. And not just my own philosophy, but like the whole team's philosophy that we're working towards, creating special places. We're stewards of these properties. We're stewards of our team members on the properties in service of our guests. And I think that type of philosophy and that type of idea hopefully will allow us to kind of keep doing what we're doing for the long term.
You mentioned team a few times. When you were thinking about starting the company, you think about making your first hires, what were some of the top criteria for you to bring on those team members that would shape Dovetail to be what it is today?
So I think for me it was about, and I don't know what your policy on swearing is, but we have like a no asshole policy. So that was one of our like starting premises, was like, okay, there's lots of big egos, there's a lot of big tension, but like we're actually going to build a business that's based on like kindness and generosity and doing good work, and the work comes first. So we wanted people that were inspired by the work, motivated by the work, fulfilled by doing great work, and in a sort of collaborative team environment in service of like the work. So I think that was sort of criteria kind of 1, 2, and 3 maybe. And I've been fortunate to surround myself with people that really care. And I think that's I think that's already paying dividends in terms of what we're creating, and I think it's gonna pay dividends for the long term.
You wanted a team that was inspired by the work. Maybe for people unfamiliar with Dovetail, how would you describe the work that you do?
So we have 7 hotels from Hawaii to Bermuda. So we are in a variety of different locations where we focus on places where personally we want to spend time, but also where we think we can make a difference and tell unique stories. We're in the hotel ownership, development, and operation space, primarily in kind of the boutique lifestyle space, as we call it. So places that are maybe not traditionally branded, have a unique point of view and unique stories to tell. And then we're fiduciaries, so we also invest our own money, and then we invest our investors' money as well. So we're also capital investors in the hotel space.
When I'm talking to different members of the hospitality daily community, I feel there's a fair amount of awareness around running the property. A lot of listeners are running these hotels, managing them. A decent awareness on the investment side. It feels like development is an area that a lot of people don't know how that world works. I wonder, for folks with no background into this world at a very high level, I wonder if you could describe hotel development, and then maybe let's talk through one of your projects to give people a sense of the basic steps involved.
And I think that's a very fair and true observation. No one has any idea what hotel development is. They're always like, what's hotel development? And I was excited by it as my first job, but I did an undergrad in business, and then I started for the IntraWest, and they're like, do you know how to read drawings? I'm like, well, what are drawings? And so you just have to kind of learn on the fly. You have to be super curious, and you have to put in the hours, and you have to pore over construction drawings and architectural drawings and think about you have to you're not going to have the technical expertise as your engineers, but you have to have enough knowledge to be able to have the conversation, ask the questions, sort of think through that. And when I think hotel development at its core is about building hotels, right? And creating hotels. And whether it's a piece of dirt that you create a new building, or sort of this building that we're in, the Freehand LA, was a vacant office building. It was almost 100 years old, the Commercial Exchange building. And it was, the premise was that it was going to be better served as a hotel in downtown LA. And so we had to think about the floor plates, we had to think about where to fit the rooms, we had to work with, it's a historical building, so we had to work with the Historical Society to make sure that our renovation plan was in keeping with the historical standards. And then we had to make sure that the numbers all worked, so that our budget was, the amount of sort of money that we thought we could make was going to justify the budget that we were going to spend on the renovation. So I think as developer, you have to orchestrate this whole game of producing something special to a budget and a schedule.
Makes sense. One thing that you mentioned earlier was the point of view that you take on each project being really important. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how you think about, I guess, like what that is, but how do you sharpen your sense of a point of view on a project?
So the point of view for us has to be differentiated, and we have to feel like we can create something that is unique to in a market, or kind of either is complementary or contrasting or telling stories that haven't been told. And so, for instance, in Newport, which was one of our first hotels, we bought a 200-room, sort of former Best Western. It was called the Mainstay. And I knew Rhode Island well, so I think that's one of the other things that's important, is you really have to understand these locations. You have to know what is expected and what stories haven't been, or what stories have been told, so you can understand what stories haven't been told. So Rhode Island is a place that my wife's family lives. We got married there. So I knew Rhode Island really well, and I knew Newport as a location that was primarily a little more traditional, a little more Gilded Age, a little more like mansions and yachts. But yet at the same time, the trade market is New York City to Boston, and there's a fair amount of sort of youth travel that goes to this market. So with the Mainstay, we wanted to create a design and create an experience and a brand that was a little more modern, a little more youthful, and then also tapped into the sort of the independent, grittier, artistic side of Rhode Island that is pretty unique. So RISD's in Providence. Providence is known as a kind of like culinary capital of like New England, and it's got all sorts of makers and entrepreneurs, and sort of just, you can sort of tell that there's like dynamic creative culture. We got to work with a local graphic designer that helped kind of birth the Wayfinder brand, and we just went all in on that, and we had a lot of fun, and we created something that the community was inspired by, because we were telling the local story. They were like, hey, Newport isn't just mega yachts. It's also the winter surfing culture. Like, we've got a huge surfing culture, and it's like, it's Newport, Rhode Island. So those are the things that inspire us and get us excited. And then our view, and I think it's proving out, is that the modern guest also wants to go deeper in these locations. They don't just want the cliched experience. They also want to kind of hear about the B-side of some of these places, and kind of get a chance to interact with some of these partners and get and experiences, which is fun.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more on how this looks if you don't know an area really well. Are you spending more time on site, or how do you get a sense of what are the interesting story elements here? So
I think you need to spend time in a place, and I think you really need to absorb it. I think having a background, personally having a background in just traveling around the world and living in these different places, I think has given me a little extra sensitivity to absorbing kind of places and cultures and what's unique or about a space. But like, so in Bermuda, we were fortunate enough to acquire the Cambridge beaches on the west end of Bermuda. It's 90 minutes from New York City, and like no one knows where Bermuda is, or it felt like no one was talking about it. Oh, that's the place my grandparents went. It's a 90-minute flight, and it's a remarkable sort of British/Atlantic kind of island culture. It's really warm, dynamic, like the people are warm. And it didn't feel like the hotel inventory, like it felt like we could make a difference, and we could do something unique. And we moved there. I mean, it was also COVID, and it was a little more flexible, but like I was able to move there. We lived there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months while we were kind of going through the initial acquisition and sort of really imagining what the new Cambridge Beaches was going to be. And while we're going through the branding exercises, the partnership exercises, the design exercises, I was living on property. I mean, it's sometimes really hard to substitute just sort of physical presence for just like reading something in a book.
Is there anything that's an incredible experience. Is there anything during that time, maybe outside of the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, were the things you were picking up just living there that stand out to you as formative in your story for the place?
So some of the physical stuff is like all of the streets have these unique names and they all have these like incredible, so there's a Bermudian cedar, which is endemic to the island, and they use it for signage, and there's like the way the gold lettering is done. And you're just like, wait, we need to pull this all in, because also the Cambridge Beaches that we wanted to reinvent was really telling the kind of the larger story of Bermuda. We celebrated its 100-year centennial in 23. So it was important to not create a hotel that could be anywhere, or not create a Caribbean hotel. We want to create a Bermudian Atlantic Island hotel and resort. So it was all those like little physical things. And then it's also like, bring back afternoon tea. Everyone loved afternoon tea. It's a tradition that I wasn't as familiar with, but in Bermuda, it's important. So and you see when you're in a place, you realize how important it is versus just like reading in a subtitle somewhere that, Bermuda has afternoon tea and they like it.
It's so funny. I feel the place I visit now, I really appreciate when it's evident that this research has been done, but also as a guest, whether it's collateral left in the rooms or otherwise, I'm learning about the place. And I find my sense of place deepens through that. But it takes a lot of work. It doesn't happen by accident. It seems that it takes a lot of work.
We're creating a house of brands of Dovetail at sort of different psychographics and different price points that allow us to, potentially create a little more of a halo effect for the different real estate that we acquire. The Wayfinder is our 4-star lifestyle hotel brand focused primarily on leisure-oriented destinations where we can create a unique space with unique stories. We have one in Waikiki, in Bishop, California, and in Newport, Rhode Island. And we think that's an exciting space to kind of see more growth. With Cambridge Beaches, we realized that there's really a lot of kind of fun and a real appeal for resorts that are connected to nature, a little more of this like rustic luxury, a little bit of like what we're doing at the Lodge in the Catskills, but not $2,000 a night. It's sort of, it's not cheap necessarily, but it's a little more attainable and it's a little more wabi-sabi, but it's, people absolutely love it. And so that resort collection that we're creating is a little more kind of one by one, but we're excited about the growth there. And then we're doing effectively a capsule hotel in New York City in NoHo that has sort of like these sleeper cabins that's for kind of Gen Z, solo traveler. We're trying to, take people, take a little bit more of an analog approach to like connect to each other. But it's right in the heart of NoHo. And again, that's super exciting, sort of $100+ kind of price point. And we think that may also kind of sprout out in some of these other sort of high density, sort of high ADR markets. So I think those 3 brands that we're creating gives us a little bit of a framework to kind of grow Dovetail in the near term.
Tell me a bit more about this capsule concept, because when I think about it, I think about maybe some futuristic sort of concept from Japan, but you mentioned the analog nature. Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about maybe folks being a little bit over this overly filtered millennials kind of design aesthetic into maybe some more analog components. So tell me a bit more about combining what seems like concepts from either end of the spectrum here into this one.
Yeah, we had this idea that so yes, the Japanese have this capsule hotel and you sort of see it through Asia, but when you go to Europe, you take the same like physical space in a sleeper cabin, like in a train and the Belmont. And now all of a sudden it's a luxury experience and it's a high-end experience, but it's the same amount of physical space. And so here in NoHo, we wanted to create these little cabins. They're private, they're lockable, but you've got baths and showers down the hall in the heart of NoHo, and it's targeting the solo traveler. And maybe they're a backpacker, maybe they're a photographer freelancing in the city and just need a place to kind of crash. But now they're all on their devices, but they all kind of like are choosing to stay somewhere a little less expected in the heart of the city. So we think that demographic is going to want to interact with each other in a variety of different ways. So we can have a board, you can pop like, you can like write a physical note, like an analog note on the board that says what you want to do while you're in New York, and maybe we can like connect the dots, sort of like a misconnection sort of setup. And I think we're going to do it in a way that is just a little more unexpected, and we have the real estate and the location that allows us to do that, which is pretty unique. So we're excited to bring that out this summer.
I can't wait to see it, because I feel like people talk about creating for a segment or a persona. To my knowledge, this is one of, if not the first, that is targeted just the solo traveler. I feel like this doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's very specific real estate, and I think, you know, being in the real estate business, you find unique real estate, and then you develop a business plan that works with that real estate. And so the real estate and the certificate of occupancy allows us to do this. But the solo travel market is actually pretty growing, and then surprisingly, it's majority women travel on their own versus men, and so that kind of creates some unique opportunities as well. And I think the fact that it's a pure play solo traveler is also going to allow us to tell a story that's a little different than a hotel that maybe has some rooms for solo travelers, but it's still predominantly like a standard boutique hotel.
I love it. When you started Dovetail, I feel this talk of building hotels in, I don't know if you want to call them secondary markets, but outside the big kind of hit areas, was still sort of early. Now I hear a lot more conversation about that. We're recording this in 2024. I'm curious, as you look at the landscape today, is there more opportunity in these secondary markets, or do you feel everybody's looking there, so it's actually urban centers or some other area that presents the most opportunity for lifestyle hospitality?
So it's interesting. So I founded Dovetail in 2018. Our first two projects were in the Catskills in Newport, Rhode Island, and this was in the Catskills before it seems like everyone was upstate. And at that time, you know, it was kind of drive to leisure. We're like, you know, it was sort of like a sub bullet point on our investment memo about how, you know, drive to leisure is probably a little more recession proof. And then, you know, COVID and drive to leisure sort of became the new standard almost. And it is more competitive for sure. What's exciting from my point of view is now we have so many more options as a consumer and as a guest within all of these different markets. We have all of these different entrepreneurs and creative developers or operators or restaurateurs that are just making it more interesting around all of these major markets. So I love that as a consumer. It's certainly become more competitive on the acquisition and development side, and also to tell a unique story, kind of going back to our sort of initial premise. I think there are still markets where there's opportunity. And I also think it's a really hard business. So I think a lot of people that got into it sort of in 2020 and 21 may not have had as deep of a track record in the hospitality space. And, you know, it doesn't mean that they're not getting some things right along the way. But if you're going to sustain a business and grow it, you need to get it all right, and it all has to work, and there's just a lot of different moving parts. And so I also think then there's going to be opportunity to help support some of these businesses or, you know, hotels that have been created within these markets. But I also think in urban centers that have been neglected or overlooked, there's probably also going to, you know, be opportunity to kind of reinvent some of these properties. Things are going to change along the way and while you're working through the business plan, and so having someone that trusts you and believes that you're going to do right by them, and that you're going to be a fiduciary, and you're going to be honest and transparent, and going to, you know, bring challenges to them early, hopefully with solutions as well. But I think that's what makes a great partner. And then ideally, both in terms of alignment, you also want someone that understands, that has a shared vision of where and how value can be created.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of how maybe, you know, where you disagree with hotel developers. It feels like everybody loves lifestyle hospitality. It's kind of a hot and sexy area. You know, if you think strategically about Dovetail, what's a point of differentiation that you take a different path?
So I think one of the things you're hearing a lot about these days is this like tech forward, low service. Maybe there's like some design, but maybe it's just pretty imagery. So it's like it's like a fake sort of, you know, visual experience. But like people are talking about their like FTEs, like full-time employees. They're like, we have 1.6 FTEs per guest. And like, you're kind of losing the point of hospitality and the magic of hospitality. And I also think that kind of, you know, at that point you're a commodity. And if you're running a commodity business, you better make sure your costs are in line. And but like long term, I don't know how you can differentiate, and I don't know long term how you can create like emotional appeal and guests that are true ambassadors for your properties and your experiences. And I think just that commodity driven guest will just go to the next sort of service department that doesn't have, or service department that doesn't have any experience. So I believe in hospitality comes from people. I believe that you have to lead with like abundance, and you have to lean into the generosity of a team to create an exceptional kind of guest experience. And I think actually long term that creates sort of outsized loyalty and outsized financial returns as well, because now you have loyal guests, positive word of mouth, direct bookings, and people aren't shopping the same way. They're like, no, we're going to stay at your lodge in the Catskills because we got married there, or I proposed to my now wife there, or I just had a great s'more by the fireplace and I can't stop talking about it. So I think that's important.
Yeah, we're both in town for an investment conference, and it feels like a lot of these panels are bemoaning the fact that labor has increased, right. And I feel like even that phrasing probably doesn't sit super well with you.
Well, I'm like, it's like there's this conversation around labor being like a lever and like, or a screw to tighten or loosen, and you're just like, no, we're a team trying to create an experience and make an impact on someone's travel. And I think if that is your philosophy, I think ultimately it's more fulfilling of a space and a business to be in. But I also think it gives you a higher probability of success over the long term, because you're actually trying to address and fulfill kind of emotional needs.
I would like to talk a little bit more about this notion of increasing your odds of success over the long term. One thing that you talk a lot about is the sense of optimism. What does it look like to operate with optimism? And I'd be curious on your thoughts on that, either kind of where we are in a cycle now, but maybe more broadly. Like what does that mean to you?
So we're Q1 24. We're at an investment conference. Everyone's talking about interest rates and how high they are, and what's going on in the world and the political atmosphere. And again, it kind of goes back to like, well, what's our business and what are we doing, and how are we like, we're in the pleasure business, we're in the joy business, we're in the comfort business. Like, you got to sort of I need to remind myself that, it's not about interest rates. It's actually about creating memories. And the other thing and I think as developers you have to be optimistic, but this is a remarkable business to be in. It's a really old business, which also sort of talks to how important this is. It's fundamental to, I think, who we are as humans in terms of our desire to interact with each other, our desire to see the world, to travel, to see loved ones or special places. And it's a growth business. There's just more travel is happening every year to more places, and there's more connectivity, and there's more sort of the ability to travel. And then we, as sort of purveyors of that and creating these settings and places for people to experience, get to take advantage of that growth. And so I think that's pretty exciting, and that's that's reason for optimism. And then I think the other piece of the puzzle that's exciting for like Dovetail and for what we do in our kind of lifestyle experience space is the trends around wellness, the trends around adventure travel, the trends around like nature-oriented travel, experience travel. It's all growing at substantially higher rates than the travel business in general. So in my view, we're already in a great business, and then we're in a sub-segment of a business that's even more, more exciting.
I wonder if you could expand a little bit on anyone or all of those trends that you mentioned in some of the things that excites you most, or where you see some of the opportunity lie in the years ahead.
So I think what's exciting about sort of experience-driven hospitality is, I think more and more we're realizing that it's not the things we buy that make an impact on our own sort of happiness and our own our day-to-day life. It's about the moments and the experiences that we enjoy and share. And so, although that's exciting for us as a in the creator of the hospitality and like lifestyle hotels, but I also just think it's exciting as a group, as humanity. Like, we're focusing on our moments and our experiences, and we're focusing less on the the creation of physical things. So that's something that that we're excited about and inspired by.